Hello friends, today we will talk about revisiting partition in Amrit Kaal, a cinematic perspective. Earlier in the earlier lecture on revisiting partition in Amrit Kaal, I talked about the concerns which have been there in the Amrit Kaal regarding the partition of India. And a new kind of a perspective is being talked about, that how partition violence which was perpetrated on so many innocent victims, and how we can in a way observe the partition violence of those times, and how the government of India made an initiative in the framework of 14th August being seen as some sort of a partition horrors remembrance day. And in a way Vibhajan Vibhishika Smriti Divas it is being seen, and how the focus of the Amrit Kaal is on the next 25 years beginning from 2022. We also talked about some of the sources, that how partition history could also be seen in the framework of literature, and the way individual diaries, memoirs, etc. they could also be seen in the framework of the partition history. And we have seen that some of the films which we discussed in the last lecture, like Lahore, which was made in 1949, which was talking about the displacement of women. And we also see that apart from that, some of the films which were made in the later times, which were dealing regarding the position of women or the honor of women, like Khamosh Pani or Pinjar in 2003. And one of other films which was made in Bengali, we also talked about Chinnamul, that how Chinnamul, which was made in 1951. And we see that how the outdoor shootings which was being done in Chinnamul with hidden cameras. And this film was called a neorealist as well, because it had some of the neorealist tenets, in that sense that how the non-professional actors, they were being used in this particular film. And it was comparatively more meaningful, in that sense that the commercial demands of a film, they were being in a way curbed, and contemporary reality was being shown to the masses. And then we see that in 1950 some of the films like Dhul Ka Phool, which was made in 1959 by Yash Chopra, and how the story was revolving around a Muslim bringing up an illegitimate Hindu child. And the classic song "Tu Hindu banega na Musalman banega, insan ki aulad hai insan banega" could be seen in this film. And we find that such kind of portrayals, they were relevant at that point of time, because the trauma of partition has not been forgotten even now by the families. And in 1950s, that was also the period of the nation building as well. And some of the films, they were dealing with the issues of nation building, where we find that the films like Naya Daur, Paigam, Mother India, Sujata, all of them, they were talking about this kind of an idea, that we have to build the nation, and whatever which had been done by the British during the colonial period, and the kind of trauma of partition which we had to face in 1947 and thereafter, which we have to forget, and we have to build a new India in that sense. So we also find that Yash Chopra reversed the theme in Dharmputra 1961 with Shashi Kapoor. And here the theme was in the framework of a Hindu family bringing up an illegitimate Muslim child. And this film also deals with the issues of religious intolerance and fanaticism, as the boy who has been raised, who is a Muslim boy who has been raised by a Hindu family, is a person who is in talking in the framework of the Hindu rights. And we also see that the idea of communalism during the times of partition was also being exhibited by this film, and the film flopped at the box office. And we find that later not many directors ventured into such kind of films, and we do not find, except when you talk about Ritvik Ghatak, and how Ghatak's trilogy, Megadhak Tara, Komal Gandhar and Subarna Rekha, all these films, they were in a way contemptuous denunciation of the crumbling humanity and the vanishing human values. And so the common theme of the displacement of the thousands of masses from their homelands and their struggle for survival in the refugee colonies is being talked about. And we also see the economic decline of Bengal during the partition as well. So we find that Ghatak's trilogy not only is trying to convey the pain of displacement, because Ghatak himself was from the eastern part of Bengal, which later became Bangladesh, and he was so culturally connected to that area that even when he shifted to West Bengal, and so even then he was not able to come to terms with his own region in terms of the cultural uprooting which he felt. And that is why in his cinema these kinds of aspects of being uprooted from one's own roots could be seen. Then we also see that some of the filmmakers, they made films in 1970s, and one of them was Garam Hawa by M.S. Satyu, and the story was by Ismat Chugtai, and it was scripted by Kaifi Azmi and Shama Zaidi, and it depicted the various hardships which was encountered by a Muslim family in Agra during partition and its aftermath, and the dilemma of whether to migrate to Pakistan or to not to migrate was there in that in this particular film. And finally it was they decide to stay in India. So we find that some of the filmmakers in later times, they were trying to talk about the trauma of partition and how individuals, they felt this kind of trauma not only for themselves but for their entire families as well. It was also being reflected in those times as well. Then we see that in 1980s, Tamas by Govind Nihalani, which was based on Bhisham Sahani's novel, it was being made, and it also reflected the partition tragedy and the violence and the bloodshed, and how the small incidents, they could incite passion. It was also being seen, and the scene where the women jump into well to save their honor became some sort of an iconic kind of a scene in this particular film and later as well. So we find that when Bhisham Sahani wrote this novel with this kind of a title, and this film was being made, and it was shown as a tele-series on television, and later it was being made as some sort of a telefilm as well. So the idea of displacement, the idea of rootlessness was being examined by this particular film, and how in the film as well as in the real life we realize that very small incidents, though those may not be connected to any kind of a communal angle, even they become communal angles at different points of time when we find that we in a way see them in that particular kind of a perspective. So the perspective is very important, which has been conveyed through this particular film. And we also see that similar kind of a scene where women were jumping into the wells was shown in a film by Sabiha Sumar, who is a Pakistani filmmaker who made Khamosh Pani in 2003. But in that particular film, the woman in question did not jump into the well to save her honor, and how she was in a way being married to a Muslim, and she remained in Pakistan. So apart from that, one of the novels which was written by Khushwant Singh in 1956, Train to Pakistan, and Pamela Rooks in a way made it into a film, and it was set in the partition of India of 1947, where a train which arrives from Pakistan, which has the bodies of the travelers who have been butchered while they departed from Pakistan. And this changes the complexion of a village, because this film was based on a village, and how there's also a background of the love affair of Jagga and Nooran. And this particular film was talking about the trains as a symbol where mobility was there, and how train also became some sort of a symbol of violence as well, where we find that people, those who were going from India to Pakistan or from Pakistan to India, so in many of these trains people, they were being killed. We do not generally find that anyone survived on these trains. So the in an inanimate kind of an object, we find that trains, they became symbol of violence. And so earlier they were a symbol of modernity when they arrived, but especially during the times of partition, they were being seen as such. Then we also see another film called 1947 Earth by Deepa Mehta, which was based on Bapsi Sidhwa's novel Ice Candy Men, and how the story is set in Lahore in the time period directly before and during the partition of India, and how it was a story about a woman, Shanta, played by Nandita Das, and Dil Nawaz, who is an ice candy man, played by Amrit Kaal, and Hassan, Rahul Khanna, and how they are in love with Shanta, both of them, and how their life changes with partition. And we see when some of the scenes in this particular film where people, they are talking that how they have to move from this particular place, from Lahore to Amritsar or in any other region of India, and over a period of time when the situation will improve, when the violence will survive, in a way subside, then they will come back to their own place. So these kinds of ideas where people, they were thinking that partition which was happening was a very temporary kind of thing. They did not have that kind of enormity. They did not believe, or they were not even aware about the enormity of the situation, could be seen in some of the films which are made at this point of time. We also see some of the films like Hey Ram, which was written and directed by Kamal Hassan in 2000, and the plot centers on India's partition in the murder of Mahatma Gandhi by Nathuram Godse, and how the film also shows the violence during the partition. And Suvir Kaul talks about the jingoism displayed during the India-Pakistan matches, cricket matches, as if completing the unfinished business of partition. So we find that how many a times we have seen that the cricket matches, they also are considered to be some kind of wars which have to be won by these teams. And even when if a team loses against the other, then how the public is see it in a framework where as if they were fighting a war. So this kind of a jingoism, this kind of a feeling that how after the partition of India, one of the country has to be dominant over the other, could be seen in some of the films as well. And we also see that cinema and cricket, both of them, they are so popular in India. And when they come together, then especially some of the films which have been made on cricket, for example 83, which was made recently, which was trying to communicate the victory of India over their rivals in the World Cup in 1983, or for that matter MS Dhoni, which was made. So they definitely have a lot of impact on the masses. And we also see earlier, one of the films which I talked about was Pinjar, which was based on Punjabi novel by Amrita Pritam. And this film was talking about the women's abduction and how she was being rejected by the society and family as well, and how she settles with her abductor as she did not have any kind of a choice. And we find that even she helps her prospective husband sister during the riots as well. So these kinds of films, they also try to communicate the kind of passive role of women during such kind of riots, and how the people, those who are their abductors, or the people those who are unleashing violence on them, so they are largely connected with the patriarchal norms of the society, and these norms where women, they have to be accepted as the equal members of the society. That is also to be seen in that particular framework. And then we talk about Khamosh Pani, which was made by Sabiha Sumar, and how it was about a widowed mother and her young son, and the film was set up in 1970s, that how a Hindu woman was converted to Islam, and her brother, when he comes in search of her in 1970s, and he is able to locate her, and she has a son who is a fanatic or who is a religious fundamentalist. And what happens when her son comes to know that her mother is a Sikh? So these kinds of issues which were concerned with the identity, they were being reflected in such kind of a cinema. And we also find that especially some of the films like Gadar Ek Prem Katha, which was made in 2001, it tries to expose Pakistan in terrorist acts, that how earlier films they were referring to the neighboring country, but this film particularly talks about Pakistan and names it, and the protagonist is vociferous and the dialogues are fierier and the accompanying violence is also there. So this film talks about the ideas of patriotism and the anti-Pakistan violence, and the rhetoric is also there, and how Pakistan's agency ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence, is being exposed, and that how it is being engaged in so many other kinds of nefarious activities. So such kind of portrayals where Pakistan is being exposed, they were not there in the earlier films, and Pakistan as an aggressor or as a country which is trying to foment any kind of violence in India, that was not being shown. So 2001 Gadar Ek Prem Katha was a milestone in that, and later films, so many of them, we see that such kind of portrayals they were being made, and how the nefarious activities of ISI and Pakistan being referred as a terror patronizing state, and this continued in so many films which were made in the new century, where we find that Hindustan Ki Qasam in 2001, 16 December in 2002, Maa Tujhe Salam in 2002, Hero Love Story of a Spy in 2003, Qayamat again in 2003, Zameen again in 2003, and Diwar, Let's Bring Our Heroes Back in 2004. So these are some of the films which are trying to communicate that how Pakistan is a terror patronizing state. Apart from that, there are so many other films as well where we find that how the portrayal of Pakistan changed in the framework of the films which were made on them. When we talk about partition, we also see that how the lingering memory of partition could be seen in the later films as well, that as recent so many films they have been made on partition, or they are borrowing or the kind of background which concerns with partition. One of them was Bhag Milkha Bhag, which was made in 2013 by Rakesh Om Prakash Mehra, and it was based on the life of Milkha Singh, an Indian athlete who was a national champion runner and an Olympian as well, and how during the times of partition they had to migrate to India and they lived in impoverished refugee camps. That is also being shown in the film. So this film again talks about the agony of the violence and the kind of professional hazards which were being in a way witnessed by the people, those who had to migrate from other regions to India. So the professional hazards, in that sense, when one is talking about these kinds of hazards, then we find that how people, they were not able to secure any kind of employment apart from being displaced, apart from not having any kind of a shelter for them, that they were living in the refugee camps, and how they had to make their own fortune when they shifted from that particular region where they were living earlier, maybe some part of Pakistan, and how they migrated to India. So these kinds of stories, they were numerous in those times, and how these kinds of stories, they were trying to portray the kind of issues which were there at that point of time. Another film called Viceroy's House in 2017, directed by Gurinder Chadha. It was a British film, and it talked about the political developments leading to partition, and we see in this particular film that how Mountbatten is enraged to find that his chief of staff, Lord Ismay, has been working covertly to draw boundaries of Pakistan to create a buffer state between the Indian subcontinent and Soviet Union, and to allay fears that a socialist-leaning United India would give Soviets access to warm water port at Karachi. So these kinds of concerns, they were also being reflected in the film, that how British they were in, how they agreed to divide India into India and Pakistan, what were their considerations in terms of making any kind of divisions, that how an inexperienced person like Radcliffe was being given the command of drawing the maps of India. He was not aware about the topography of India, and despite that an inexperienced person was being allowed to draw the map of India, and how such a kind of map which was being made by him had so many deficiencies. So we find that how the displacement of the people which resulted because of partition, and the violence which they suffered was also as a result of the policies of the government. And we find that how this kind of this particular film also talked about the love story of a Hindu boy and a Muslim girl in the background. And we find that the film also tries to convey that how Mountbatten was given assistance of an inexperienced British lawyer, Cyril Radcliffe, as well. So apart from that, we also see that some of the films like Toba Tek Singh, as I told you, it was based on the story by Saadat Hasan Manto, and the film was made by Ketan Mehta in 2018, in which Pankaj Kapoor played the part of the protagonist. And the story takes place just before the India-Pakistan partition in one of the oldest mental asylums in undivided India. And it was situated in Lahore, and it was home to Hindu, Muslim and Sikh patients who were left behind by their uncaring families. So we find that friendships, they were thick between the patients who had nobody but each other for their company. And how Toba Tek Singh was kind of a film or the story on which this was based, and how a person who was mentally unstable, how he had to see the partition of India. So Toba Tek Singh was the village from this person belonged, and his name was Bishan Singh, and his story that how he was staying awake for the last 10 years, whether it was day or night, and when partition caused him to leave the country, he is known to be his home when he was sane, and even when insane state of mind as well. So this story of displacement and how painful it is for the people who are not in their senses in a worldly way as well. So they are not able to decide where they have to go, because they are from the mental point of view as well, they were there in a kind of a territory in which they could not make a decision. So such kind of questions, irrespective of who the person was and the kind of a state of mind in which the person was, partition had nothing but pain for the people, those who experienced it, and this is what is being conveyed in this film, some sort of a poignant tale by a celebrated writer Saadat Hasan Manto. And we find that how Manto shifted to Pakistan, and he was also tried for obscenity as well. Then again a film called Bharat, which was made in 2019, which was an adaptation of the South Korean drama Ode to My Father, which was made in 2014, and it traces the development of India, independent India, from the perspective of a common man, in which partition was as a background, and the lingering memory where finding the lost family members was there in the male protagonist played by Salman Khan, and where he waits for his father Jackie Shroff in the entire film. And at one point of time he is able to find his sister played by Tabu in the film. So we find that these kinds of stories where people, those who shifted from one area to another, how they were attached to their kin, especially their relatives or their parents, and all through they were looking for them, and sometimes the wait ended and sometimes it did not, because they were not able to locate them. One of the films in the recent times which was made in 2023, which is Gadar 2, which is the story again which has been some sort of a sequel to Gadar, which was made in 2001. And in this film we see that how when Sunny Deol goes to Pakistan to get his captured son in the backdrop of 1971, because the story carries further from Gadar, where the background of partition was shown. And in 1970s, in the 1971 war, where we find that Sunny Deol is now a good supplier to the Indian Army cantonment, and he lives with his wife and son, and the son leaves for Chandigarh for his college studies. And we find that how Sunny Deol is contacted by the Lieutenant Colonel Devendra Rawat for help in supplying the Indian soldiers with weapons, as skirmishes taking place with the Pakistani soldiers at border during the third India-Pakistan war. And we find that when Sunny Deol had gone to Pakistan in the earlier film Gadar, and one of the army personnel, Iqbal, who spotted him in 1970s here, and we find that he orders an explosion at the border, and Sunny Deol in a way is injured, and he is being taken care of by some people. He goes into coma, and it is being believed by his family that he has been captured by Pakistanis, and his son Jeete, he leaves for Pakistan against everyone's wishes to rescue his father. And there, when he meets one of the persons who helped Sunny Deol in the earlier film, played by Gul Khan, who also helps his son in terms of securing a job at a hotel, and which is supplying food to the prison where Indian soldiers were being held. And there he comes to know that Sunny Deol was never captured, and the son of Sunny was captured, or he is being imprisoned by in Pakistan now. And there now Sunny Deol, when he comes back and he realizes this, he goes to Pakistan again, and then there's a fight which ensues, and he gets back his son and his love interest as well, who was daughter of his friend Gul Khan. So in this way, Pakistan is again defeated second time by Sunny Deol in that sense, and it also creates some kind of emotional feeling as well in cinema hall, because so many people, when they watch films with which are there in the framework of nationalist feeling or idea of patriotism which is being shown. So how we find that partition, which is some kind of a tragic experience, and how it is to be remembered now in the framework of Vibhajan Vibhishika Smriti Divas on 14th August, this kind of an initiative which has been taken, where we find that how these kinds of themes they have been part of these films, and not only cinema but TV serials, folk dramas, literature and poetry, they show the pain and the anguish of partition. So with this I would like to end the discussion. Thank you very much.